Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this Hope for the Future workshop. We are a climate charity working to equip people across the UK with the confidence and skills needed to engage with their elected representatives on climate issues. Today, we're going to be talking about MPs. We'll be learning about who they are and how we can work with them, including sharing how you can write to your MP to motivate them to take much needed action on climate change. While we'll be focusing mostly on members of Parliament, a lot of what we will talk about in this session will be broadly applicable to members of Scottish Parliament and also to members of Senedd Cymru. With all of that in mind, let's get started and learn a little bit more about who MPs are. The letters MP stand for Member of Parliament. This is because MPs do a lot of their work in a group of buildings in London called the Houses of Parliament. In the UK, we have 650 MPs, or Members of Parliament, who each represent a particular area of the country. This area is the MP's constituency, and the people that live there are their constituents. The most important part of an MP's job is to represent the views of their constituents. This is regardless of if their constituents voted for them or not, or even if they're old enough to vote. This means that you will have an MP whose job it is to represent your beliefs. But before we learn more about that, we need to understand a bit more about what it is that an MP actually does. Typically, MPs will spend the first half of their week in the Houses of Parliament. This is where the laws for the UK get made. One of the main things that MPs will do in Parliament is debate bills and vote on whether or not they'll be passed into law. In these debates, MPs should represent the views of their constituents and take these views into account when they vote on the bills. It's also important to know that MPs can propose their own bills to debate. They might even do so if a constituent contacts them about an issue that is important to them and proposes a law that they would like to see put into effect. MPs will then spend the latter half of their week back in their constituency. While they're there, they will meet with their constituents to discuss any concerns they may have and then work on the issues raised, often by lobbying certain individuals and organisations on their constituents' behalf. Constituents can also come to their MPs and ask for political support from them. They may want their MP to express their support for a certain campaign, political platform or policy. For example, a constituent might go to their MP and ask that they support a climate-conscious platform by opposing the opening of a new coal mine. An MP might then help out this constituent by agreeing to write to a government minister and oppose the coal mine, or to vote against it when the matter is debated in Parliament. This timetable has been taken from the diary of an MP and shows what a typical week for an MP looks like. The timetable is colour-coded. Parliamentary business is in blue, constituency matters are in green, and free time is in pink. Take a moment to have a look at the timetable. Are there any patterns you can see? What does it tell you about what an MP's job is like? There are a few things that we can learn from this timetable. One of them is that MPs tend to work very long days. This MP is working from 8 AM to 8 PM almost every day. Another thing we can see is that MPs do a relatively even split between parliamentary and constituency work. There's around an equal amount of green and blue on this timetable, but there's not a lot of pink, which means there's not a lot of free time. A final important thing that we can learn from this calendar is that MPs do lots of visits to constituency groups. On Friday at 1 PM, this MP had a visit to a local school booked in. This is worth bearing in mind, as this could be something you want to write to your MP and ask about. If you ask, they may be willing to come into your school and talk to you and your classmates about climate change. So, let's say you want to get in touch with your MP to talk to them about climate change. How do you actually contact them? And once you have got hold of them, how do you make sure that you can both have a productive conversation? At Hope for the Future, we've developed a unique approach to engaging with MPs that's designed to help you have a positive conversation with your MP. We call our method the relationship-based approach. The relationship-based approach is a process you undertake before meeting or writing to your MP, and there are 3 steps to it: research, finding common ground, and creating an ask. Let's take a look at each step in a little more detail. Step 1 of the relationship-based approach is research. Ken Hamer says that designing a presentation without your audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. This doesn't mean that you should write a love letter to your MP. Instead, it means that you need to research your MP so that you can tailor your message when you speak to them and present what you're saying in a way that's easier for them to connect to. After all, when you talk to someone, it's always helpful to know who it is that you're actually talking to. TheyWorkForYou.com is a really useful website for finding out initial information about your MP. If you input your postcode into the home page, then They Work For You will tell you who your MP is, as well as give you an overview of the different ways your MP has voted on a variety of issues, including climate issues. If you want to find out a more detailed record of what exactly your MP has said about climate issues in Parliament, then you can use Hansard. Hansard is a written record of all debates that occur in Parliament. So if you want to see what your MP has been saying in more detail, then you can go to hansard.parliament.uk and search for your MP's name and see if anything comes up in relation to climate issues. Having a look at your MP's social media and website is also a really helpful tool when you are researching them. If your MP is already supporting national campaigns or groups of constituents, then their social media is where they're most likely to be posting about it. Once you've done all of your research on your MP and have a better idea of who they are and the sorts of issues that they care about, then the next phase of this step of the relationship-based approach is to use your research to help work out where your MP falls on a 5-point scale. You should draw out the scale like this, where 1 stands for completely opposed, 2 is more against than 4, 3 is neutral, 4 is more for than against, and 5 is completely in favour. Once you've drawn out the scale, have a think about the specific issue that you want to talk to your MP about. Maybe in this case it's an issue to do with climate change. Most likely it's an issue that you yourself are a 5 on. It's something that you care deeply about. Bearing this issue in mind, take a look at the scale. Think back to all of the research that you've done and work out where your MP falls on this issue. Are they a 5 like you? Or maybe they're more neutral at a 3. Or perhaps they're all the way down the other end at a 1 and are actually completely opposed to the issue. Wherever it is that you work out your MP falls on this scale, make sure to make a note of it. Once you've completed your research, you'll be ready to move on to step 2 of the relationship-based approach. This step is called finding common ground. There are a few reasons why it can be really beneficial to focus on identifying some common ground when you contact your MP. One reason is that having common ground with somebody helps you to communicate more constructively with them. If you and your MP both share a certain goal, interest, or point of view, then it's more likely that you're going to work well with one another. Another reason that common ground is important is that it can be a useful tool with which you can influence your MP. If you find out that you're a 5 on the scale and your MP is much lower down, then it may be tempting just to try and drag them higher up the scale by bombarding them. However, this is rarely an effective technique, as it can make people react very defensively and even dig their heels in and become less willing to change. But if you're able to identify points of common ground with your MP, then you can use these to help you coax them up the scale point by point. Venn diagrams are a great tool to plot your research onto once you've done it. Draw 2 overlapping circles and list all of your MP's interests that you found out about while you were researching them in one of the circles. Then, on the circle on the other side, list your interests. This can include the issue that you want to talk to your MP about, but may also include things like empowering your MP to take action and building up support in your community for tackling this issue. Then, once you have a set of interests on either side, look for any similarities or points of overlap and write these down in the central segment. Everything that ends up in this segment is the common ground that you share with your MP. However, if you find yourself in a situation where you're a 5 on a certain issue and your MP is a 1, then the idea of finding common ground this way may feel impossible. This is a completely understandable feeling. The good news is that even in a case like this, there may still be some way that you can identify common ground. In most cases, any MP is going to have an interest in being re-elected in the next general election. If there are no other points of overlap between you and your MP, then you can use this interest in re-election as your common ground. If you find that this is the case for you, then your Venn diagram might end up looking something more like this. Let's imagine that you want to see more green jobs available in your local area, but perhaps you learn from theyworkforyou.com that your MP has voted against issues surrounding green jobs, and you learn from Hansard that your MP has even spoken up in debates opposing green jobs. So they're definitely a 1 on the scale and completely opposed to this issue. But you do know that your MP will want to win votes in order to keep their position and be re-elected in the next general election. In this case, your common ground can be achieved if you can convince your MP that regional investment in green jobs will be a popular local policy and a vote winner, and therefore that it will help them out come election time. Once you've arrived at your common ground, you can use it to help you come up with an ask. Crafting an ask is the third step to the relationship-based approach. When you're thinking about what exactly it is that you want to ask your MP, it's really important to make sure that the ask that you make of them is SMART. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. This means that if you're asking your MP to take an action, you should always be specific about the action you want them to take, be able to easily measure if the action has been completed or not, ask for an achievable and realistic action, and lay out a time frame for your MP to complete the action within. The reason that it's so important for you to make your ask SMART is that it helps you to stay on target when you're talking to your MP and make sure that you can get something out of your conversation. If they agree with your climate concerns, then that's a great thing to hear, but it's even better if something meaningful can be done about it. Bearing this in mind, there are some things you can ask your MP that will be helpful to address the climate issues you care about, and will be realistic and achievable for your MP to accomplish. You could ask your MP to pass along your letter to the government minister that is responsible for working on the issue you are contacting them about. You could ask your MP to submit a written question. This would involve your MP submitting a question to a government minister to find out more detailed information about their work, or to request that they take a certain action. Talking to the media is another good ask to make of your MP. You can ask them to write articles, blog posts, or do interviews with the media to discuss and promote the climate issue or campaign that you've brought to their attention. You could also ask them to work on addressing the issue in conjunction with authorities like the local council. This might be the sort of thing you'd like to ask them if you're interested in enacting changes that are specific to your local area. You could also ask your MP to propose an adjournment or Westminster Hall debate. You could ask them this if you want to see the issue that you wrote to them about discussed more broadly by a variety of different MPs acknowledging and weighing in on the issue. When you're thinking about all the different options of what to ask your MP, remember that it's really important that you tailor what you're asking to your MP. For an MP that's lower down on the 5-point scale, we recommend making simpler asks. But if your research has indicated that your MP is higher up on the 5-point scale, then you might want to consider something a bit more involved. Once you've done your research, found some points of common ground, and crafted your SMART ask for your MP, then you've completed the 3 steps of the relationship-based approach to contacting your MP. This means that you're now ready to take the final step and actually reach out to your MP. When writing to your MP about climate issues, there's a template that you can follow to make sure that your letter is effective and stays on target. After addressing the letter to your MP, you should begin by introducing yourself. Say who you are and why climate change is important to you, including any examples you can think of how climate change affects you locally. This is where the research that you've done can really come in handy. What you've learnt about your MP will help you tailor your message here, as you can mention an issue that you know they'll have an interest in. You should next introduce the reason you're writing to them. This should only be around a sentence or 2, and should provide helpful context and point out things they need to know. Next, you should make your SMART ask. Here is where you need to let your MP know what it is that you're asking them to do about the issue you're writing about. This means that as well as being clear about what you'd like your MP to do, you should also be clear about the time frame that you'd like them to complete this in. After you've introduced yourself, your reason for writing, and shared your smart ask, you should sign off and finish your letter. When signing off, it's a good idea to remind your MP of what you said at the beginning about why climate change is important to you, and then to thank your MP for their time and say that you look forward to hearing from them. Once you have your letter all written out, then you'll need to send it off. It's likely that your MP will have 2 different addresses that you could send your letter to, their parliamentary office or their constituency office. You should be able to find both of these postal addresses on theyworkforyou.com. If you have the time and resources, then it's never a bad idea to send your letter to both your MP's constituency office and parliamentary office. However, MPs are generally more likely to respond to messages that come into their constituency offices. So if you have to choose only one, it's better to opt for sending your letter to their constituency office address. It's also worth thinking about whether or not to send an email alongside your letter. Not all MP constituency offices may be running back in person yet due to the ongoing pandemic, so you may decide that you want to email a copy of your letter alongside posting a paper one. To see more templates of how to write to your MP, including templates for specific contexts and with example text, visit www.hftf.org.uk/template-letters. Now we've covered who MPs are, the best ways to communicate with them, and how to write a good letter to ask them to take important action on climate change, let's see how much you can remember. Can you remember what the 3 steps of the relationship-based approach are? The 3 steps to the relationship-based approach are research, finding common ground, and making a smart ask. Well done if you remembered all 3. And can you remember the 4 things to do when writing a letter to your MP? The 4 things to do when writing a letter to your MP are: introduce yourself, explain your reason for writing, make your smart ask, and sign off. And that brings us to the end of our workshop. Before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought. If there's one thing that I hope you take away from this workshop, it's that no one person is too small to make a difference. It's true that we need structural change to properly address the climate crisis, but it's also true that people just like you and me can help us all to achieve this change. By working with our MPs and lobbying them to vote on laws that improve the climate, we play a crucial role in making the world a better place for us all. So get writing to your MPs. You don't have to do everything at once. How about just starting with step 1 of the relationship-based approach and researching your MP? You can learn more about them and in the process decide what change you'd like to see happen and what it is that you'd like to ask for from them. Then you'll be ready to take the next steps and eventually write your letter. And don't forget that if you need any extra guidance or support, that you can visit www.hftf.org.uk to find out more about working with your MP. We're here to help your voice be heard.